I could still see the way Roxy's mouth fell open when I told her I would not be in the house for Christmas. The shock on her face was almost theatrical, as if she had rehearsed 100 expressions, but never once imagined she would need the one that showed she wasn't in control. Her eyes widened, her eyebrows curled upward like frightened little birds, and she blinked at me as though I had spoken in a foreign language. For a moment, I stood there in the living room, my living room, feeling the same chill that runs down your spine when a thunderstorm is about to snap a tree in half. After years of being the silent support beam in that house, I had finally said the only words she never expected to hear from me, and they hit her with the force of a falling chandelier. "I will not be here," I repeated calmly, the way a person repeats a simple fact about the weather. "I will be traveling for Christmas." Her voice cracked. "Traveling? Traveling where?" It amazed me, truly amazed me, how someone could be as manipulative and self-assured as Roxy, yet so utterly unprepared for the slightest resistance. She had grown used to a world where I made myself small to keep the peace. She had grown used to me cooking every meal, scrubbing every pan, arranging every holiday, managing every guest list, ironing every tablecloth she insisted on, and performing every task she pretended to have done herself. She had grown used to leaning on me without gratitude, without consideration, without even a polite nod of acknowledgement. She had grown comfortable, too comfortable, treating me like the invisible force holding everything together. So when I told her I had booked myself a Christmas away, she reacted like a spoiled empress whose favorite servant had suddenly decided to breathe as an equal. "You cannot just leave," she sputtered. "Not now. Not when my family is coming. You agreed?" "I did not agree," I interrupted gently. "You announced." There was a brief silence, the kind that makes the walls feel alive. Norman, who had been standing near the kitchen doorway, stared at me with the confusion of a child who had just watched his teacher do something unexpected, like cartwheel across the classroom. "Mom," he said, "why are you being like this? You always help with Christmas." I turned slowly toward him, and I felt the ache that lived quietly beneath my ribs shift in a way I could not ignore anymore. Norman was my only son. I had raised him with the softness of a woman who wanted him to have a better world than she had been given. But somewhere along the way, he had let Roxy's shadow swallow him whole, and he had stopped seeing me as the mother who had built a life from scraps. He saw me instead as a constant utility, a fixture, a background function, something automatic, something that served. "My dear," I said softly, "I have helped for years. I have done more than helped, but this year I made plans." Roxy stamped her foot, literally stamped it like a frustrated teenager. "You cannot do this to me." To her, not to Norman, not to the holiday, not even to herself in a meaningful sense. To her. I remember thinking in that moment how startlingly clear everything became. Her panic wasn't about Christmas at all. It wasn't about family. It wasn't about the holiday spirit. It was about losing control of the system she had created, where I played the part of unpaid labor, and she played the part of gracious hostess while never lifting a finger. She had invited 23 of her relatives for Christmas without asking. 23. As though my home was some kind of community center she had personally reserved for her own performance. As though I had nothing to do with this house, nothing to say about its use, nothing to protect within its walls. Her voice rose sharply. "You are abandoning your family." "My family?" I asked. "Or your audience?" She froze. Norman frowned. "Mom, come on. This is not like you." That was the first honest thing he had said in a long time. It truly wasn't like me. For years I had let myself believe that silence was the same as peace, that compliance was the same as love, that accommodating disrespect was somehow noble. But something inside me had shifted. Something long buried under years of dishes, laundry, vacuum lines, and the quiet humiliation of watching Roxy take praise for meals she did not cook and parties she did not plan. Something old, something tired, something wise had finally clawed its way to the surface. "It is time for me to take care of myself," I said simply. Roxy's face twisted in a way I had seen before, whenever she was caught off guard by the consequences of her own arrogance. "You are being selfish." I gave her a steady look. "For the first time in years, perhaps I am." Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe so I can share more stories with you. Norman stepped forward like he wanted to argue, but even he must have sensed something different in me. Something still, something resolute. I was not yelling. I was not emotional. I was not defensive. I was simply done. "I will return after Christmas," I said, picking up my small overnight bag from the armchair. "The house will be here when I return. Everything else, the two of you will have to handle." Roxy's voice came out shrill. "But we do not have food. We do not have anything prepared. You cannot expect me to handle 23 guests alone." "Then perhaps," I answered, turning toward the door, "you should not have invited 23 people into a house that is not yours." Her mouth opened again, but I had already stepped outside. The crisp December air hit me with the force of a long-awaited exhale. Even the light felt different, less harsh, less filtered through the fog of resentment that had clouded the walls inside. I walked down the steps slowly, savoring the sensation of leaving behind something heavy, something corrosive, something I had allowed to cling to me far too long. As I reached the sidewalk, my heart was pounding, not from fear, but from release. It felt like the echo of 100 unsaid truths pulsed beneath my skin. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself. But if this moment is where the story begins, then I must confess something. The woman who walked down that sidewalk was not acting out of impulse. She was not reacting to a single announcement or a single moment of entitlement. No, the truth was far more layered, far more painful, far more deliberate. This decision, this refusal, this departure had been brewing for months. It had begun the day I was cleaning out Norman's old home office. I'd been gathering boxes of dusty books and folders, thinking about how this space had once been Bill's, too. My late husband, the man with gentle hands and steady eyes who believed in keeping every receipt and record in perfect order. I had expected to find nothing but aging papers and fading memories. Instead, I found lies. I found a folder with Norman's name on it. At first, I thought perhaps it was a forgotten tax file or one of Bill's old investment documents. But when I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Credit card statements, loan letters, accounts Norman had never opened, debt he had never incurred, interest piling like snowdrifts, all in his name, all tied back to Roxy. The floor beneath me seemed to tilt. I felt a chilling pressure against my chest, the way you feel when you walk into a cold cellar and the air presses down like a warning. Roxy had taken Norman's identity, his name, his trust, his obliviousness, and used it like play money for her compulsive spending. She had built an empire of lies while pretending to be the refined, polished, wealthy daughter-in-law that her extended family adored. But the numbers were not lies. The debt was not a lie. The signatures that did not quite match Norman's handwriting were not lies. Worse, there were notes, her handwriting, describing how she would eventually convince Norman to sell my house. My house. The house Bill and I had built from the ground up. The house where every beam, every nail, every board held a memory of our sweat, our laughter, our sacrifices. Roxy had planned to pressure Norman by using their shared financial struggles as leverage. She had written it out like a to-do list. I remember sitting on the carpeted floor of that office with the folder open in my lap, the cold numbness spreading through my limbs like frost. I remember whispering into the empty room, "How could I have been so blind?" But betrayal is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, like mold creeping beneath wallpaper. You do not see it until the wall begins to crumble. I spent that entire night awake, staring at the ceiling of my bedroom, wondering how many times Roxy had smiled at me while planning to dismantle the life I had built. Wondering how many holidays I had cooked for people who had sharpened their knives behind my back. Wondering when Norman had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as part of Roxy's property management. By dawn, I had made a decision. I was done being their safety net. I moved my savings into a private account. I called Jeff Lawrence, my lawyer. I protected my house, legally, irrevocably. I gathered every document that proved what Roxy had done. And then I waited. I waited for the right moment. The moment when she would push too far. The moment when her arrogance would give me the justification to act. That moment came when she invited all 23 members of her family for Christmas. When she expected me to feed them, house them, accommodate them, and stand silently in the background while she took the praise for my work. That was the moment I finally saw the trap clearly. She wanted the illusion of wealth. She wanted the illusion of generosity. She wanted the illusion of running a grand household. And she wanted me to make all of it real for her. So I stepped out of the illusion entirely. I left. I packed. I booked a luxury hotel suite in Washington, D.C. I informed no one. And now, as I walked toward the car that waited to take me away, I felt something extraordinary. I felt weightless. You do not know how heavy a burden is until you set it down. But I also felt something else lurking beneath the surface. A strange mixture of guilt and anticipation. I had protected myself. I had planned carefully. I had secured my home. I had exposed the lies quietly. I had ensured that when Roxy's 23 relatives arrived, they would walk into a hollow stage. No food, no decorations, no support, no illusion to uphold. The truth was about to crack open without me even being there to witness it. And as much as I wanted to feel completely free, the echoes of the past still clung to me. The years of silence, the years of servitude, the years of being treated as though my life belonged to someone else. Walking to that car felt like walking out of a fog I had lived in so long I forgot it was fog at all. My hand trembled as I reached for the door. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I finally understood how long I'd been waiting for this moment. And because somewhere deep inside me, I knew this was only the beginning. I left Baltimore behind me that morning, watching the familiar row houses fade into muted colors through the taxi window. There was something haunting about seeing the city shrink into the distance, something that made me feel as though I were peeling away a layer of myself that had grown too tightly around my ribs. The sun was rising behind thin winter clouds, turning the sky the color of faded copper. For most of my life, that sky would have filled me with the cozy sense of a holiday morning. Instead, I felt a strange thrill in my chest, a quiet, pulsing freedom that made my palms tingle. It was the first Christmas Eve in decades where I had not woken early to prepare dough, clean the guest room, or check the pantry for last-minute ingredients. It was the first holiday where the weight of obligation had not dragged me out of bed before dawn. I did not have lists taped to the refrigerator. I did not have a sink waiting to be filled. I did not have anyone depending on me to make magic out of thin air. I was alone. And for the first time in a long time, that word felt comforting. The drive to Washington, D.C. passed in a blur of bare trees and restless thoughts. I kept replaying Norman's expression from that morning. How baffled he had looked, how hurt he seemed by my refusal to continue the role he had grown used to. There was a part of me, a familiar old part, that wanted to comfort him, to apologize, to smooth over the rough edges of his discomfort. But beneath that impulse was a colder, firmer truth. If I kept cushioning him from the reality of Roxy's behavior, I would be protecting the lie, not him. He had chosen not to see for years. He had chosen convenience over clarity. He had chosen silence over uncomfortable truth. I had done the same, in my own way. But that era was over. When I arrived at the hotel, a grand, polished building with marble floors and soft golden lighting, I felt a strange mix of nervousness and exhilaration. The concierge greeted me with a warm smile, and I realized with a jolt how rare it had become for anyone to interact with me as a guest, not as a worker in the shadows. "Welcome," he said as he handed me the room key. "Wishing you a peaceful holiday." A peaceful holiday. The words struck something deep inside me, like tapping a buried bell. I took the elevator to the 15th floor, the soft hum of the machinery soothing after the chaos of the last few days. When I unlocked the door to my suite, the sight of the spacious room sent a ripple of disbelief through me. A king-size bed, crisp white sheets, a view of the city glowing under the winter sky, a small sitting area with velvet chairs, and a bathroom with a tub deep enough to drown every worry I had carried for decades. For a moment, I simply stood there, letting the unfamiliar luxury wrap itself around me like a warm coat. I had never in my life booked a room like this for myself. Not once. Not even in the early years of my marriage, when Bill and I could afford small indulgences, but always chose practicality instead. This was indulgence. This was intentional. This was mine. I set my overnight bag on the bed and sank onto the edge of the mattress, feeling it cradle me with a softness that made my eyes sting. I had not realized how tense my shoulders had become over the years. I had not realized how much I had carried in silence, how many small humiliations I had brushed aside, how many boundaries I had allowed to be crossed, simply because I thought that was what a good mother, a good host, a good woman did. But sitting there in that quiet room with the muted city hum beyond the windows, I felt something breaking open inside me, a grief I had postponed for too long. It rose slowly, like warm water in a tub, until my breath hitched and tears slipped down my cheeks without warning. I cried for Bill, who would have protected me if he had been alive. I cried for the years I had wasted fulfilling expectations that were never mine. I cried for the dream of peaceful old age that had been turned into indentured servitude. I cried for the realization that none of this had been necessary, only familiar. When I finished, I wiped my face gently and whispered into the quiet room, "Enough." The word felt sacred. After a hot shower, I changed into a cream-colored sweater and comfortable slacks and decided to take a walk through the hotel lobby. I had nowhere to be, no timer to watch, no dishes waiting. It felt strange to move through a day with such open space, like walking across a clear field after years inside a maze. I wandered toward the small boutique area on the lobby's east side, drawn by faint music, instrumental, soft, waltz-like. And that was where I saw her. Christine, my childhood best friend, the girl who once lived 3 houses down from me, the girl who used to spend afternoons weaving beaded bracelets with me under her grandmother's willow tree, the girl who had been the maid of honor at my wedding, the girl I had lost touch with somewhere between raising Norman, losing Bill, and accepting far too much from people who gave me so little. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating, but then she turned, and her eyes widened with the same stunned disbelief I felt. "Isabel?" she asked. My breath caught. "Christine?" She rushed toward me with arms open, and before I knew it, we were hugging. Tight, warm, familiar in a way that felt like being wrapped in sunlight. When she pulled back, her face was glowing, framed by silver hair that made her look gracefully ethereal. "What on earth are you doing here?" she asked. I gave a small, incredulous laugh. "Escaping," she raised an eyebrow. "From what?" I shook my head. "How much time do you have?" "An entire lifetime," she answered with a grin. We walked to the lounge cafe, settling into a cozy corner near the fireplace. The flames crackled softly, and the scent of cinnamon drifted from someone's hot drink. Christine folded her hands and leaned in, her eyes full of gentle curiosity. "Tell me everything," she said, and so I did. I told her about Roxy's entitlement, about Norman's blindness, about the unpaid labor that had swallowed my life, about the documents I had found, about the lies, the debt, the plans to take my house, about the trust, about my lawyer, about the 23 guests, about my refusal, about walking away. Christine listened with growing fury, her lips tightening, her eyebrows nodding, her hands clenching around her teacup. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. "Isabel," she said, "you have been living in servitude, and no one deserves that. No one." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I suppose I let it happen." "No," she corrected gently. "You survived it, and now you are reclaiming yourself." That was when she told me why she was in Washington, D.C. She had come to take a few classes at a winter workshop. Handcrafted arts, artisan techniques, jewelry work, and small-scale sculpture. It was something we had loved as girls, something life had swept aside for both of us. "Come with me," she said suddenly. "Join the workshop." I blinked at her. "Christine, I have been out of practice for decades." She smiled with the mischievous spark of the teenager I used to know. "Then we will be rusty together." Those words stirred something inside me, something soft, something hopeful, something that felt like the first sprout of spring pushing through winter soil. I had spent so many years pouring my time into other people's needs that I had forgotten what it felt like to create something with my own hands. I had forgotten the thrill of shaping color, texture, form, the quiet joy of making beauty for its own sake. So I said yes. We spent the afternoon surrounded by stained glass pieces, delicate tools, vibrant threads, polished stones, and the sound of people rediscovering their own creativity. The instructor welcomed me warmly, and Christine introduced me as if she had been waiting for this moment for years. As my fingers worked, slow at first, then gradually more confident, I felt a deep calm settle over me. It was as if parts of myself that had been dormant woke up, stretching long limbs that had been tucked into cramped corners for too long. For the first time in years, I was not performing. I was not serving. I was not accommodating. I was simply living. Meanwhile, back in Baltimore, chaos was blooming like a weed. I knew, even without seeing it, exactly how it was unfolding. The empty refrigerator, the bare pantry, the locked cabinets, the missing decorations, the canceled cleaning service, 23 guests arriving to a silent house with no hostess and no illusions. Roxy, frantic, unprepared, desperate to maintain an image she could never sustain without me propping it up. Norman, caught between anger and confusion, unable to understand how the woman who raised him had become invisible to him. Their expectations were collapsing in slow motion, and I felt no guilt for letting the truth reveal itself. The holiday chaos was theirs to face. The consequences were theirs to carry. The unraveling of lies was theirs to endure. By the time evening settled over Washington, D.C., Christine and I were laughing over dinner, reminiscing about the mischievous things we did as girls. She teased me about the time I had tried to dye my shoes purple using beet juice. I teased her about the time she nearly set her kitchen curtains on fire trying to melt crayons into candle molds. We laughed until tears came. Good tears. Light tears. Not the kind that left salt scars on your cheeks. And as the night deepened, I realized something profound. I had not felt this alive in years. Freedom was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, subtle. It was the simple pleasure of being able to choose my own evening. It was the soft glow of reconnecting with someone who remembered who I had been before life had worn me thin. It was the knowledge that while Baltimore descended into disarray, I was here, healing, rediscovering, becoming myself again. Later, when I lay in the hotel bed, wrapped in crisp sheets and warm light, I let my mind drift to the next morning. Christmas Day. Roxy would be imploding. Her relatives would be asking questions she could not answer. Norman would be forced to confront truths he had avoided for too long. And I would be preparing to return home with lawyer Jeff Lawrence by my side, ready to reveal everything openly, clearly, irrevocably. But tonight, I allowed myself the rare, exquisite luxury of resting without fear. My last thought before sleep carried me into the dark was simple. They had taken advantage of my silence for years. Now, they would see what happened when I finally spoke. By the time Christmas morning dawned over Washington, D.C., the city held a hushed, almost reverent stillness. Snow had fallen during the night, soft, delicate flakes that blanketed the streets like powdered ivory. I stood by the tall window in my hotel suite, watching as the early sun cast pale gold across the rooftops. For a long moment, I simply breathed, allowing myself to feel the peace I had been denied for so many years. A quiet Christmas morning was something I had not experienced since before Norman was born, and savoring it now felt like sipping a warm drink after wandering through a long winter. I did not rush. I did not hurry. I did not fill my mind with tasks or obligations. I made myself a cup of tea, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and sat in the chair by the window, letting the warmth of the cup thaw the last remnants of old anxieties. My mind drifted toward Baltimore, not with worry, but with a calm, distant curiosity. I could almost picture the moment the first doorbell rang. 23 relatives arriving with their festive expectations, stepping out of cars carrying brightly wrapped boxes and casseroles, eager hugs and forced holiday cheer, expecting lights, expecting aromas, expecting warmth, expecting me. Instead, they would find Roxy standing in an undecorated house with bare walls, unlit rooms, an empty refrigerator, a pantry containing nothing but a dusty jar of cloves and 3 stale crackers, and tension so thick it would cling to their clothes like smoke. Not a wreath, not a ribbon, not a scent of cinnamon, not a trace of hospitality, only the truth. I wondered how long it would take them to realize that the hostess they believed Roxy was had never truly existed. She had been a mirage, crafted from my labor. A carefully lit stage I had built and maintained for years while she basked in applause meant for me. I sipped my tea slowly. I felt no guilt. I spent the morning with Christine in the artisan workshop. She greeted me with a warm, knowing smile, as though she understood without needing to ask that something deeper had shifted inside me overnight. "I am glad you came back," she said as we settled at adjoining workstations. "I'm glad I had somewhere to come back to," I answered. The workshop buzzed with soft chatter and gentle clinks of tools. People shaped shards of glass into mosaic pieces, polished tiny stone pendants, bent wire into intricate patterns, and explored crafts they had loved in their youth or had always wished to try. The room smelled faintly of wax and cedar. Christine handed me a piece of smooth, pale wood. "Let us make something simple today," she said. "Not for anyone else, for yourself." The idea startled me. I had not created anything solely for myself since Bill had passed. Everything I made, every dish, every decoration, every thoughtful gesture, had been for others, often people who did not notice or appreciate it. My fingers traced the grain of the wood, as though I were touching a delicate truth. "What should I make?" I asked softly. "Whatever your hands lead you to," she replied. I smiled. It felt like stretching a muscle I had forgotten existed. I began carving gentle curves into the surface, slow, careful strokes that gradually revealed an abstract form. Something like wind, something like motion, something like the quiet swirl of a life rediscovered. Christine leaned over occasionally to admire my progress, but she did not interfere. She let me find my rhythm, my comfort, my voice through the wood. As I carved, the tension that had lived in my shoulders for years dissolved, drifting away like smoke rising from a candle wick. My mind felt clearer than it had in months, perhaps years, and beneath that clarity was a sense of readiness, because the time had come. After lunch, I returned to my suite, slipped into a clean blouse and warm gray slacks, and packed my bag with steady hands. The moment I zipped it closed, there was a knock on my door, 3 firm, familiar taps. I opened it to find Jeff Lawrence, my lawyer, standing in the hallway with his briefcase. He wore a charcoal overcoat dusted lightly with snow, and his expression held the calm determination of a man who knew exactly what needed to be done. "Are you ready, Isabel?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, more than ready." We made the short drive back to Baltimore in his car. Snow drifted across the roads in gentle swirls, catching the light like falling petals. The closer we came to my neighborhood, the more my heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from a calm certainty. I had prepared for this moment thoroughly. I had protected myself. I had chosen my path deliberately. Jeff glanced at me once during the drive. "Whatever you see today, remember, this is your home. You have the right to decide who enters it, who benefits from it, who respects it, and who does not." His words settled into me like anchors. When we turned onto my street, I saw the line of cars first. Many were unfamiliar, vehicles belonging to Roxy's expansive network of cousins, uncles, nieces, nephews, and assorted relatives who never failed to multiply like rabbits every holiday season. They were packed along the curb in chaotic rows, half covering driveways and blocking mailboxes. I recognized the burgundy van belonging to Roxy's sister, the pale blue sedan of her aunt, the oversized SUV of the cousin who always brought questionable casseroles. Every car was a testament to the expectations Roxy had built on the foundation of my labor, and every car was about to become witness to her unraveling. I felt no tremor of hesitation as I stepped out of Jeff's car. My boots crunched softly in the snow. The cold air bit at my cheeks, sharp and invigorating. Jeff walked beside me, holding his briefcase with the quiet authority of a man ready to deliver truth like a verdict. From inside the house, I heard raised voices. Not festive laughter. Not music, not delight. Arguments, sharp, tense, overlapping arguments. When I reached the door, I did not knock. It was my home. I turned the key with deliberate calm and stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the expression of pure chaos. Guests were gathered in clusters across the living room and foyer, their coats still on, their arms crossed tightly, faces flushed with either cold or anger. The tree stood bare in the corner, empty branches reaching upward like skeletal fingers. Someone had attempted to drape tinsel over a curtain rod, but it hung crookedly, an unmistakable cry for help. The kitchen was a battlefield. Pots and pans lay scattered across the counters. Grocery bags sat unopened. Someone had managed to spill flour across the floor in a powdery explosion. And in the center of it all stood Roxy, her face red and blotchy, her hair frizzed at the edges, her eyes wild with desperation. When she saw me, she froze. Everything did. For a heartbeat, the house held its breath. Then Roxy marched toward me as if she meant to slam a door shut with her body. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "How dare you disappear and leave me to deal with this mess? You ruined Christmas." I felt a strange calm wash over me, the way an ocean tide pulls back before a wave hits. Her voice no longer penetrated me the way it used to. It slid off me like water off stone. Jeff stepped forward slightly. "Roxy," he said in an even tone, "I would advise you to lower your voice." Several of her relatives looked at him with recognition and then confusion. They must have known the look of a lawyer when they saw one. Norman appeared in the hallway, his face pale and drawn. "Mom," he said quietly, "you left? You really left." "I did," I answered, "and you managed to survive, although the state of this house makes me question how well." His gaze dropped. Roxy jabbed a finger toward me. "You humiliated me in front of my family. They think I tricked them. They think I lied. They think I made promises I could not keep." I held her eyes. "Did you?" She flinched, but only for a moment. Then Jeff opened his briefcase. That sound alone was enough to silence half the room. He withdrew a stack of documents, neatly bound, secured with clips, labeled. He handed a set to Norman, who hesitated before taking them. Roxy tried to snatch the papers away, but Jeff shifted smoothly, keeping them out of her reach. "Everyone should hear this," Jeff said firmly, "since it affects all of you, financially, legally, and personally." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Roxy's eyes darted frantically around the room, as though searching for an ally in a sea of unfamiliar faces who suddenly seemed far less sympathetic. Jeff addressed the room with a measured voice. "Isabel has placed this home into a legally binding trust. It cannot be sold. It cannot be mortgaged. It cannot be used as collateral. It is protected now and for the future." Gasps echoed around the room. Roxy looked like she had been struck across the face. "That is not fair," she cried. "This house was going to be Norman's." Jeff nodded calmly. "And it still will be, eventually, but not under your control, and not under any circumstances that endanger Isabel or her property." One of the older relatives, a stern-looking man with a deep voice, asked, "What does this have to do with us?" Jeff lifted another document, evidence of fraud, identity misuse, debt accumulation under false pretenses, borrowing money from some of you using claims about future inheritance that were not true. The room erupted. Voices rose. Accusations flew. Roxy stumbled backward, blinking furiously as her relatives closed in with demands, questions, anger. Norman stared at the documents in his hands as though they were written in fire. His breathing quickened. His face drained of color. "Is this real?" he whispered. I met his eyes, my son's eyes, tired and uncertain and finally painfully awake. "Yes," I said softly, "it is real." Roxy collapsed onto a chair, her breath coming in short bursts. "You cannot do this to me," she whispered. "I am not doing anything to you," I replied. "You did this to yourself." Her relatives circled her like a storm. And in that moment, watching silently from the calm center of the chaos, I felt something shift deep inside me. Not triumph, not vengeance, not even satisfaction, but vindication. A quiet, steady vindication that warmed me from within like a slowly rising flame. My voice came out calm and even as I addressed the room. From this day forward, I will maintain relationships only with those who show respect, honesty, and gratitude. I will not be exploited again. The house fell silent except for the faint crackling of tension in the air. I exhaled slowly. This was my home, my life, my rebirth. And this Christmas, this strange, extraordinary Christmas, I reclaimed everything that had been taken from me. The house was still humming with tension when the last of Roxy's relatives began to funnel out the front door. Some left angrily, muttering under their breath. Others shook their heads in disbelief, casting cold glances at her as they passed. A few murmured quiet apologies to me, awkward, embarrassed, not knowing where to place their shock. The truth had cracked over them like thin ice, and they were slipping through it one by one. By late afternoon, only a scattered handful remained, lingering in the kitchen or standing stiffly near the foyer. They spoke in low voices, as if afraid that raising them might shatter whatever fragile social veneer remained. Snow had begun to fall again, drifting softly against the windows, muting the world outside. Inside, the aftermath of chaos clung to every corner. Untouched ingredients sitting on counters, abandoned cups, half-open bags of groceries, flour still coating the tiles like fine dust. I stood quietly near the dining room doorway, watching it all. Not with resentment, not with vindictiveness, but with a calm, steady clarity I had not felt in years. Norman was sitting at the kitchen table, the document still open in front of him. His shoulders were slumped, his fingers knitted together tightly. The shock that had first washed over him when Jeff opened the briefcase had deepened into something heavier. Reflection, perhaps, or reckoning. His face was pale, his jaw clenched as if holding back the pressure of 1,000 realizations he had refused to look at for far too long. I walked toward him slowly and took the seat across from him. The chair creaked softly under me, the old wood carrying the familiarity of decades. He looked up at me, and for a moment he was not the man who had defended Roxy's endless demands, nor the son who had let me become invisible. He was the boy who once ran into my arms after scraping his knee on the playground, the boy who trusted me to be his constant, his home, his anchor. "Mom," he said quietly, "I did not know." "I believe you," I replied. "But I should have known," he added, his voice cracking. "I should have seen what she was doing. I should have listened." I rested my hand gently on the table, letting the silence settle between us like soft snow. "Sometimes," I said, "the easiest truths to ignore are the ones closest to home, the ones that cost us too much to see." He swallowed hard. "It cost you too?" "Yes," I said, "for a long time." His eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. "I am sorry, Mom. I am so sorry." It was not the apology of a child seeking forgiveness. It was the apology of a grown man seeing, perhaps for the first time, the quiet strength of the woman who raised him, and the way he had let her become a shadow in her own home. I nodded slowly. "I know." He wiped his face with the back of his hand and exhaled shakily. "What happens now?" Before I could answer, we heard a faint, choked sound from the living room. Roxy sat curled on the edge of the couch, clutching one of the throw pillows like a life raft. Her mascara had smeared down her cheeks, her eyes swollen and red. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, stripped of the confidence that came from standing over someone else's labor. Two of her relatives, her cousin Denise and her Aunt Eleanor, stood nearby, their expressions strained and unimpressed. They had stayed behind, either out of concern or obligation, perhaps both. When I entered the room, Roxy lifted her face toward me with a mixture of anger, humiliation, and something that looked like desperation. "You planned this," she whispered. "You wanted to embarrass me. You wanted all of them to hate me." I shook my head. "No, Roxy, I wanted the truth to speak for itself. What people think of you now has nothing to do with me." Her lip trembled. "You could have helped. You always help." "That was the problem," I said softly. She looked stunned for a moment, as if the world she had constructed where I existed only as an extension of her comfort was dissolving faster than she could process. "I am your family," she insisted weakly. "You are my daughter-in-law," I corrected. "And for years I tried to build something warm with you, but respect works both ways, and you never allowed that balance between us." She let out a sob, lifting the pillow to her face as though to hide behind it. Her Aunt Eleanor cleared her throat. "Isabel," she said, "we did not know any of this." "Truly." She painted a very different picture. I nodded. "I know." "We believed her when she said she handled all the holiday preparations," Denise added, her tone tinged with embarrassment. "I suspected as much," I answered gently. Silence settled over us, a heavy, contemplative quiet. Finally, Eleanor said, "We are leaving now. We will take Roxy with us." Roxy shot upright. "No, I am staying with Norman." Norman stepped into the room then, and the shift in his posture told me he had made a decision long overdue. "No, Roxy," he said softly. "You are not staying here tonight." Her face collapsed. "Norman, please." "You lied to me," he said, his voice steady, though his eyes were full of pain. "You lied about money. You lied to your family. You lied about my mother. You lied about this house. And you took advantage of her kindness over and over." She shook her head furiously. "I did it for us, for our future." "No," he answered, "you did it for yourself." The truth hung in the air like a suspended breath. Roxy looked around the room, searching for support she no longer had. When none appeared, she stood up shakily, clutching the pillow as though it could shield her from the consequences. Eleanor and Denise helped her gather her things. There was no yelling, no dramatics, only the quiet crumbling of illusions. Before leaving, Eleanor paused by me. "Isabel," she said, "I hope this Christmas brings you peace." "It already has," I replied. When the door closed behind them, the house fell into a stillness I had almost forgotten existed. Not oppressive, not exhausting, just quiet. pure, deep quiet. Norman moved toward me, uncertain. "Do you want me to leave too?" he asked. I reached out and touched his arm gently. "No, you live here. This is your home too." His shoulders slumped with relief. "I want to fix things, Mom." "I know," I said, "but fixing begins with seeing, and you have finally opened your eyes." We spent the next hour cleaning, not because we had to, but because it felt symbolic, clearing the flour from the floor, putting away untouched ingredients, restoring some order to the kitchen. As we worked, Norman spoke in low tones about all the signs he had missed, the documents he had overlooked, the excuses he had believed. I listened, not to shame him, but to understand how the pattern had woven itself so tightly around him. When dusk settled and the house grew dim, I went to the cabinet above the fireplace and retrieved a single ornament, an old one Bill and I had bought during our first Christmas together. A tiny wooden star with a carved swirl in the center, reminiscent of the craft I had made that morning. I hung it on a solitary nail above the mantel. No tree, no garlands, no glittering lights, just that one star. Norman watched me quietly. "It looks peaceful," he said. "It feels peaceful," I replied. We shared a soft smile. Later that night, when the house had grown silent and Norman retreated to his room, I sat alone in the living room with the small lamp casting a warm circle of light. I thought about Christine, my rediscovered friend, about the workshop, about the quiet joy of carving something for myself, about the hotel room that had given me space to breathe, about the trust now protecting my home, about the boundaries I had finally reestablished, about the future that stretched ahead, open, unburdened, new. And then I thought about the viewers of this story, people listening from living rooms across the world, perhaps relating in ways I could not even imagine. What would you have done in my place? Tell me where you are listening from. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you would like to support more stories like this one, you can use Super Thanks. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.